We have the AV. Good morning, everyone. Looks like let's go ahead and get started here. We're running just a few minutes late, and we've got a big and hopefully interesting panel. We'll get through here. Excuse me. Well, good morning. Thank you all for coming out on a Saturday morning. Those of you who were over at Dr. Dolchovsky's place last night, especially thank you for coming this morning. Yesterday we heard about the Skylab experience and the Salyut and Mir experiences, and so we're evolving today to talk about the ISS. And ISS, as you all know, is the most audacious and brilliant program, I think, in space that we've all put together. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I believe Dr. Ushakov is going to give us an introduction, so I'd like to welcome him up to the podium, please, to say a few words before we get started. Thank you.
Good morning, dear colleagues, dear friends. It would be much more fair if there was an introduction made by one of the crew members, and it makes it even more of an honor for me to address this incredible panel and all the panelists who've gathered here, the people who've been making and are still making ISS history. International Space Station is kind of a segment of the human civilization where the best of the Earth are represented. This man-made butterfly that is the symbol of our summit, as you can see on the screen, shows us once again what it is we can do when we join our forces. And using NASA terminology that I like, this is a worldwide team. It's an unprecedented effort, both financial side-wise and membership-wise. $177 billion is a number that I've come across. That's probably not the comprehensive number, but it comes up in multiple sources. Anyway, it's an order of magnitude more than any other international project that we know about.
Участие большинства космических агентств всех стран, где существуют такие агентства, более 1200 исследований.
There's over 1,200 research projects. There's over 1,500 researchers that are involved in all kinds of experiments on the ISS. There's dozens and dozens of countries involved. There's over 50 tons of cargo that's been launched for science, both cargo and equipment in support of the science projects, and thousands of hours of multiple projects. ISS is the biggest manned space platform, starting on December 4th, 1998, when the first manned mission took place, and the first increment ensued, and this is year 14 of the ISS apps, and this legend lives on. Starting in November 2000, it's been permanently manned. The biggest achievements in the fields of medicine, biology, psychology, anthropology have been achieved. ISS is a sort of a fast response platform for Earth emergencies, climate disasters, and so on and so forth. The list is great, and the list goes on. And we are sure, beyond any doubt, that there will be more brilliant pages written into this book. Crystal growth, protein crystal growth, is one of the endeavors. Also, such techniques, such microcapsule technique that's been developed for and practiced on ISS, they'll be used in cancer treatment. Robotic assets that will be used for high-precision surgery purposes, microbiology inventories, and expose and biorisk experiments that have proven the highest resistance of all kinds of organisms to a space environment. The so-called the so-called persisters, highly persistent living organisms. On the one hand, this data turns upside down what it is we know about the life spread through the universe. On the other hand, it opens the pathway to developing new medicines and vaccines for all kinds of treatments. Radiobiology, Matrushka, and all kinds of other experiments on the ISS are still in the nascent stages, but still they're paving the way towards humans finding their ways into the deep space that has assessed the cosmic ray impacts and other aspects of deep space mission, and all kinds of other projects. Power generation and power transfer, communication and navigation system, cryo systems, robotic systems of all kinds and shapes, life support systems, an atmosphere system, water system, food system. What I mean by food is food production on board an orbital complex, health protection and safety, including radiology and so on and so forth, habitation module, including inflatable modules, and so on. And we all hope that the International Space Station will become the engineering platform for the future interplanetary flights, including microbiology developments that will be required. Successful flights. The station is expensive. The International Space Station is quite costly, but it's been a very successful science and research platform. Thank you very much.
Spasibo, Igor Borisovich, for your very nice remarks. And in the interest of time, since this is a large panel, I'm going to limit the introduction to kind of just a few remarks. I'm going to ask each of the panelists, I'm going to introduce each panelist and then ask each of them to make some short remarks. Please try to limit your remarks to 3 to 5 minutes, and I think we can get through everyone and still have enough time left for hopefully a lively discussion. Feel free to ask questions after each panel member makes his or her remarks. I'd just like to start by saying that, as I was beginning to say, the International Space Station, as you all know, is the most audacious space construction project we've ever undertaken. And even those of us who were deeply entrenched in the development and then the execution of the operations of assembly of the space station, I have to say I think we are all a little bit pleasantly surprised that everything has gone as smoothly as it has. I mean, it's when you think about all the different missions and it had to go in the right sequence. Any kind of a failure or hiccup would impact all the missions downstream, and still we've got this thing built more or less on schedule. So I think it's really an impressive feat. Very, very quickly, one of the findings of the Augustine Committee in 2009, of which I was a member, was that one of the most important things that came out of the station was this international framework. Really, it's remarkable not only technically that the station went together as it did and is doing what it's doing. It's really remarkable that all these countries, former Cold War and World War II enemies, frankly, have come together and have figured out how to work so well together. So I think those are important themes. As we go and talk about the station today, some of the suggested themes that we've come up with was dealing with the logistics of different size crews, different dynamics between 3-person crew, 2-person crews, and 6-person crews, and then intermediate sizes in between now that we've got kind of a staggered rotation. Dealing with possible reduced crew size, which we saw at the end of last year due to a technical failure of a rocket that we could have had to, may have had to evacuate the station, but certainly had a reduced crew for a little while, and also the cooperative research and sharing of facilities. So let's go ahead and begin. I've got folks we've got a great panel here. We've got a mixture of flyers and scientists, and so I'm going to mix it up a little bit. The first person I'd like to introduce is Bill Shepard. Everyone, we all know him as Shep. Shep is from a very distinguished astronaut class. Even though I'm a hairball myself, Shep is a maggot, and I believe he's the only maggot here today. Several of his classmates are actually on our NSBRI user panel. Shep got to fly 4 times in space. He flew 3 space shuttle missions, STS-27, STS-41, and STS-52, and then he was served as the commander of Expedition 1. My last shuttle mission was STS-92, ISS-3A, and we actually went up to the station and installed 2 pieces using the robotic arm and EVA, and we left the station with the last bits of supplies for Expedition 1, which launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome just 2 weeks after we departed from the station. So with that, Shep, I know, as we all know, he's no wilting violet, so he told me he's going right off the reservation, so let's start out with a lively discussion. Shep?
Leroy, thank you, and I'd like to say a big hello to all my friends, particularly guests from Russia that I haven't seen in many years. Listening to the discussions yesterday, it was very interesting retrospective, but I want to talk more about what we need to do in the future. Space station, I think, is a very good analogy for what humans will have to do to go certainly to Mars and maybe elsewhere in the solar system. The machine's going to be very big, probably bigger than space station. It's too much to be put up with a single booster. It's going to have multiple launches. It will be assembled in low Earth orbit. It'll bring together many of the aspects of the world community to provide technology and capability, and space station today is all of that. So I think it's the blueprint for the future. The questions are, what do we need to do differently to make it more capable? One of the things I'd like to focus on were the experiences of the first expedition, getting ready to fly, and our time on orbit. And I thought a lot about what subjects would be appropriate for this venue, and I want to talk mostly about the psychological aspects of relationships within the crew and between the crew and the ground, because I think this is one of the key parameters for a successful remote, long-duration expedition without a lot of connection with the ground. And I can't get into this without talking about ethos. What is the ethos? And this is just a natural aspect of a beginning program, but the relationship between the crew and the ground started out quite bad. And this was because there were many agreements, many decisions, things that had been pre-legislated that eventually were undone or broken or not observed. And the crew regarded the ground very poorly in this light. And it was not something that we expected, but given the circumstance that we had, we said, okay, everything's new, people are getting used to this environment, so we will go with this. Give you a particular example. I flew with 2 exceptional cosmonauts, Yuri Kudzenko and Sergei Krikalev, and every night we would do email. And because of the way the email was managed, the ground would get into the outbox and manipulate a certain way. And email kept getting lost over and over again. And the ground blamed the crew. The crew didn't know what was going on. And it turned out that it was some procedural error that was being done on the ground, but nobody stood up and said, hey, we didn't do this right. You guys told us from the beginning that something was improper. We should have looked into it. We didn't do it right, and we didn't handle it well. That was never said. And this is a typical incident of many on board. And I just think that these expeditions are going to continually have conflict between the ground and the crew on board. And we've got to get to an environment where we have the most trust and the most understanding that we've got a good, competent crew on board. They are capable people. They've got the right sense of mission. And if they lose that trust with the ground, it's going to be a less than fully performing team. I think this is one of the most important lessons that I took away from my time as Expedition 1. And I'm not trying to point fingers or make blame, but we are living in a space culture where we operate machines and we deal with crews this way, and this has got to change. The crews on board have to have the autonomy that they need, particularly when They are not in constant communication with the ground. We had prolonged comm outages on Expedition 1. One day we were back into comm. The ground wanted to operate a piece of equipment which was being assembled. The crew said, we're not ready to check it out yet. We're not sure it's unpacked correctly. An hour later, the device started running and basically destroyed itself. And it turned out later that the ground had commanded it inadvertently to come on, and the crew was blamed for that. We didn't find out till after the flight that that responsibility was laid on the crew, and that was wrong, but that's a typical thing that happened. Now, the ground, I don't think maliciously did that, but it was just something that came out of the control center because some engineer or controller didn't get the word and turn the thing on, and this happened. But this is a typical type of event in this environment. So when we send people to the moon, let's say they're on a base for prolonged periods on the moon, or we send them to Mars, we've got to let them use their best judgment and kind of step back and see what happens. I can't tell you the number of pieces of equipment that we dealt with on board that were specifically designed so that astronauts and cosmonauts could not get into them and do anything with them. And there were 3 separate incidents of things that we did on a space station where the device came up and didn't work properly or was malfunctioning or we couldn't turn it on. And we turned the radios, put the radios down low, went to sleep, got up early in the morning and worked on these equipments and fixed them without telling the ground. And then subsequently, there was discussion with ground control, and they said, said the Vosduke or the CO2 separator or whatever. We worked on it last night, and we got this thing back in operation. And the ground said, well, it's not possible. I said, well, we did it. And and then they said, well, how did you do it? So we would explain that. And somebody would jump on the net and will say, well, basically break it again. Don't undo what you did. Remove this thing from functional condition. Till smarter heads prevailed and said, no. Let's just see how it runs. And it all turned out to be okay. But this is the kind of culture that we really have to examine. Are we operating correctly for the future? I lay this on the legacy that we have evolved from going back to the early days of spaceflight where so much had to be done at the command of the ground. But I think we're moving into a new area. It's a very rich topic for discussion, but I think it's one of the more central things that should be discussed in forums such as this. Thank you.
Thanks, Shep. I think most crews would absolutely agree with you, maybe all crews, in that I think everyone's experience that has flown up in space, especially long duration, is that the tension generally is not between crew members, but between the crew and the ground. And we heard about these such incidents and experiences on Skylab and also Salyut and Mir. Do we have a couple of questions for Shep? Anyone have any questions now? We're also going to have questions at the end of the introduction. So if you've got one now, that's fine. Otherwise, we can go on and wait till the end. Dave?
So in the Mars 520, when we asked about conflicts, they definitely do occur. They are dominantly with mission controllers. What was interesting in discussing post-experiment with the crew was the question of were they resolved, and the answer is largely no. They're what you're saying, which is they're left in this sort of you give up fighting. You just stop objecting to what's going on, but it leaves this lingering after effect of disrespect or this sense that the system isn't working nearly as well as it could. And I was sort of surprised, since I've heard what you've said before about this, I was surprised we saw the same thing in 520. And clearly this is something that emerges out of some sort of inadequate anticipatory socialization or training of mission controllers and crews regarding what is the appropriate way to apportion responsibility, send commands, receive information, and provide autonomy. Communication delays, I think, reduce the number of conflicts by virtue of the difficulty of the delay and the feedback in that. So,
I think we're very fortunate in that, at least on the space station, we've had no real critical incidents. But that doesn't mean that this sense of relation between the crew and the ground will not be stressed by some emergency. I'm just fearful that we have not constructed the right mechanism for the crew and the ground and the vehicle to do what's got to be done in these instances.
Okay, thank you. The next panel member I'd like to introduce is Valery Vasilyevich Bogomolov, who needs no introduction. We all know Valery quite well, of course, and he's been on several of the panels yesterday. But just very quickly, Valery, of course, is a physician and a scientist. He's been at IBMP since 1984 and was promoted to deputy director in 1994. He was instrumental during phase 1 of the NASA Mir program, and he's currently one of the leaders who is authorized to speak on medical issues for everything to do with space. So I'd like to ask Valery to please make a few remarks.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. First off, I'd like to make a correction. I've been with IBMP since 1971, but it's not that important. I would like to stress that ISS is a unique project, and what we are concerned about is to maintain the state of the health of the crew while flying in outer space for extended periods of time. Since the get-go, when we started out on different stations, there is no things too small when it comes to monitoring of the state of the health of the crew. This is true for the environment. This is true for the performance of the countermeasures, psychological, physiological aspects of the crew well-being, and all kinds of off-nominal situations. Over the course of this lengthy time period, we have worked out a pretty unique system of collaboration of different medical institutions and panels that collectively take care of the health of the crew members. First off, this is operations medical team, multilateral team. It's the standardization medical team. They're also trying to come up with the uniform approaches to taking care of the health of the crew. And this is the group that takes care of the structure, the medical policies to be used for the benefit of the crew members on board. And I think the most important outcome of what we have done is our ability to better understand each other. And I'm not talking about Russia and US, but also international partners as well, Japanese, European partners, Canadian friends, and so on. So it's definitely an achievement, because what we have achieved is the spiritual unity, spiritual understanding of the commonality of the good cause that we are involved in. And, you know, the station has been flying in the manned mode for 12 years, and over the course of this time period we have encountered a great many different problems associated with the actual performance of the ground crew support, as well as all kinds of situations that happened during the implementation of the flight programs on board and changes being made to the flight programs. And we remember very distinctly the time period when we had to let the shuttle to stand down for a while, and during this time period we only had 2 people on board of the ISS, which was pretty much an imposition on those two crew members, because they were supposed to have been doing a lot of extra work as far as maintenance. And at this point of time, different agencies had different vision as to the roles and responsibilities of different crew members and their capabilities, their respective capabilities. And even then, under off-nominal circumstances, we managed to work out understanding. What's important that we are involved in a weekly conferences with the crew members, and flight surgeons are playing the instrumental role in this process, and those are the most knowledgeable medical experts as far as their awareness of the state of the health of any given crew member, as well as some other partners, because we have MMOP, which is a multi-rental medical panel, and I would not take too much time dwelling on those issues, but it was interesting to watch the maturity of the station. It was interesting to watch the development of our crew capabilities when we stepped up from 2 to 3, from 3 to 6 crew members, which imposed certain requirements on the medical aspects of their well-being, and we were supposed to drastically improve our monitoring capabilities, our diligence, and quite obviously along the way there were some negative aspects. We had to accept certain risk, we had to accept certain setback as far as operations, as far as timeliness of our operations, and our station has been planned to stay in existence up until 2020, and we don't have that much time left in order for us to address and resolve all the medical issues that are still open. To us, it was really a big deal to see new symptoms in the functioning of a human body, which have been detected lately. And this is just a testament to a substantial increase in the will of all the partners to continue this research. It's a collaborative effort on the part of the entire science community to dig deeper, to come up with more sophisticated and comprehensive approaches in different situations that occur on the station. This work is being done on the ground. I'm hopeful that we will continue along the way towards even greater success. The amount of experience we have gained over the years on the International Space Station is definitely a huge advantage, and the fact that over the course of the operations of the ISS we hadn't had any major medical emergencies, it's also a definite advantage. Nothing that ever happened on board ever disrupted the flight program, and we have managed to deal with all kinds of minor situations that we used to bump into. And lastly, I would like to mention one more factor, which is the duration of time during which we operate the station. Pretty much the same way as on the Mir station. What happens that it's just a natural wear and tear that we see going on the station. Biodegradable things also show certain aging. Every now and then it is necessary to replace orbital units, and in order to keep abreast of what is going on, we need to be able to resolve those issues in a timely, in an exemplary fashion. I'm trying to look ahead, and in the future it'll be even more important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bogomolov, for your remarks. Is there a question for Dr. Bogomolov before we move on? Okay, thank you, Dr. Bogomolov. Our next panel member is Ken Bowersox, also known to all of us as Sox. Sox is another very accomplished astronaut. Sox got to fly 5 times in space. First flew on 4 space shuttle missions, STS-50, STS-61, STS-73, and then STS-82 before beginning training to become the ISS-6 commander. Sox flew up to ISS aboard shuttle on STS-113, and then while he was in orbit, we had the very unfortunate Columbia accident, and so Sox and his crew were forced to come down actually on Soyuz TMA-1. Now, Sox is a Navy pilot, and pilots generally don't like to fly the A model or the 1 model of anything. And TMA-1 had an interesting failure coming back down and caused them to go into a ballistic entry mode, which the ground didn't notice because when it happened, they were already in the communications blackout zone. And so they landed down in the steppes of Kazakhstan, some 400 or 500 kilometers away in the ballistic region rather than in the nominal region. So the helicopters were looking in the wrong place. Subsequently, it took a little while to find them. And, but no worse for wear. I know that Nikolai and Sox and Don got themselves out of the capsule and ended up pulling out the survival pistol for fun, and I think shot off every round of ammunition that there was, waiting for the helicopters to come and find them. So, Sox.
Thanks, Leroy. Yeah, you know, it's funny. Some people would look at that experience and go, gosh, that must have been really scary, or that surely was unpleasant, you know, a ballistic entry. Truthfully, that was one of the greatest experiences of my life. The ballistic entry is, there's no pressure at all because the crew can't really do anything. And you just sit back and relax and enjoy the ride. And then on the ground, the 4 or 5 hours while we were waiting for the helicopters to come and pick us up, it was the most relaxing and peaceful return to Earth that I've ever had. You know, the flowers, the cool air. It was really a fantastic experience and something that I treasure. If I had my choice, I would do it the same way again. I just wanted to make 2 points. We've got a lot of people to talk, and I don't want to go too long. But the first thing I want to mention is the fact that I hear a lot of people say, you know, it's time to quit going in circles. We need to go off and explore. And on one hand, I'm happy that people feel that frustration and want to go other places. I personally don't think that we're quite ready for that. And one of the things that I try to remind folks of is that the space station is all about exploration, all right? It's about building the systems we need for a future interplanetary ship or a future starship, future ships like that. They'll have the same types of systems that the space station has. If you put big engines on the space station, you could take it to Jupiter or maybe even farther if you're really, really brave. And we have to build that time in orbit, kind of like a car going around a test track, before you're ready to take it off on the intercontinental or around the world trip. We also have a lot of team building to develop. Shep brought up some of that. The team aspect of station, I think, is one of the biggest and most important factors and one of the biggest benefits that's going to come out of the program. Building international teams, building teams of international folks working on a small crew, building a team between the ground and the crew on orbit, between the folks that build it, the folks that operate it. That huge team, another member of the team that we can't forget is the taxpayer who helps fund that particular effort. That whole team has to work together and has to focus on an activity in order to be able to move forward. If you look at exploration now, there are a lot of different activities going on. I mean, and there are a lot of people paying their own money. There's these rich guys out there paying their own money to do things in exploration because they're excited about it. You've got guys like Paul Allen investing hundreds of millions of dollars in efforts like Stratolaunch, where he wants to launch a rocket off of an airplane. We've got Elon Musk with SpaceX getting ready to launch cargo to the International Space Station, where he ponied up $100 million of his own money to do that. And the list goes on. There's a lot more people, Richard Branson, all these folks. And everybody wants to get involved. if we take all that energy and focus it the way teams work, we're going to eventually start to move and go out further into the solar system. I'm not sure that's a great thing. I look at some of the bad things that people do, and sometimes I think we should keep humanity here on Earth a lot longer before we go out and infect the rest of the solar system. But it will happen someday. But the space station and the focus that space station can bring is going to be really important to that. What I learned about teams on space station was just invaluable. And I think the biggest thing I learned is that you can't always have it your way. Part of being on a team is often doing things that you don't want to do or giving on something that you don't want to give in on in order for the rest of the team to move forward. And putting aside your own self-interest in the interest of the team is a very, very difficult thing for all of us as humans to do. It's difficult in marriages, it's difficult in an operational team, and you have to figure out how you get past that. And you can't train people enough, you have to practice it, you have to do it. And you have to have something that's important and puts pressure on you so that you develop those skills. People under pressure act differently, all right? When you're at a party, you could be nice to everybody, it's easy, and you leave and you don't see them again, it's not a problem. But when you're under pressure, sometimes the worst comes out in people, and you have to learn to forgive each other. And Space Station taught me that, and I hope the rest of you are learning some of that. The other thing it taught me is how powerful teams are. And so Bobby and George, I want to thank you for helping to bring this team together. You know, we all work together and then we go off and we do different things and we forget about the rest of the members of our team. And so it's great to be here today with all of you, to see a lot of you again that I haven't seen in a long time, and to be reminded of how powerful our team is.
Okay. Thanks. We have a quick question or two for Sachs. Okay, I'll move on to our next panel member. Inessa Kozlovskaya, of course, also needs no introduction. We all know her very well. Inessa, of course, is also a physician as well as a scientist, and also spent some time doing a postgraduate course in human and animal physiology. She's worked for many years at IBMP and has numerous awards, including the honorable title of Honorable Researcher of the Russian Federation. She, of course, led yesterday's discussion on Salyut and Mir, and thank you for joining us again, Inessa.
I'm under the impression that this is my work spot right here by this table. And quite frankly, I could ask the organizers of this symposium to allow me to rest today after yesterday's tough day, but the ISS is something that I would hate to stay away from. I've been working in space medicine and particularly in neurophysiology, gravitational physiology, in other words, physiology that studies influence of gravitational factors on the capabilities of a human being, and those systems are the most vulnerable ones when it comes to spending any extended period of time in the outer space. The rest of the systems are not nearly as susceptible as the ones that I have been focusing on for many, many years. So those impacts are such that when they are present, the body adapts to this situation, but once, all of a sudden, it is gone. Only at this point, we start seeing those changes that have taken place in the body of a human being who had, in fact, spent an extended time period in space. And this is just amazingly interesting to me, and just like my idol, Professor Gazenka, the father of the medical efforts in space. He was just an amazing person, and he encouraged me to work in physiology. He offered me all kinds of support, and he told me that you have to work in this area. This is the most important application of what you could do. And since then, I've been working in the field of space physiology, and it turned out that not only is it an important area, but it's also amazingly interesting field of studies, because we have seen so many mind-boggling, literally, things that had just a diverse effect on the way we have been seeing those things on the ground. We have received and enriched our knowledge about human body so much that I don't have enough time to tell you even a little bit of all that. And we are doing a lot of experiments on board, and the suggestions that we receive from all the people on the ground, this is essentially, this mirrors the amount of knowledge and the amount of enthusiasm in the space community on the ground in regards to being able to conduct those kind of experiments on a station. And we have received a lot more data. You know, we were under the impression, and actually everything gave us this impression, that we would come to the station with already rigidly developed system of providing support for the crew members. We did not expect any major changes, because it just so happened that 7 U.S. astronauts had flown on our station and went through our methodology and our way of doing business. And we thought that our way of doing business is the primary one, and the entire world community is going to accept those principles. But when we happened to be on the same station, all of a sudden, it turned out that the input that both parties are capable to provide and the countermeasures of both systems were not only were they different, but they were absolutely, positively different. They are so different that I don't have enough words to explain it to you. And yesterday I spoke on the Mir situation, and we still are working on this issue when we bumped into during Mir time. This situation raised so many challenges and gave us so many things to think about that it's going to take quite some time for us. Just today we're going to be discussing one of the new issues, the imperative vision, intracranial pressure that we have, changes that we have seen recently in astronauts. And at some point we thought everything is fine and we're ready to fly to Mars, we're ready to fly to deep space, and then all of a sudden some things pop up which proves to us that we don't know a lot. What we know is not nearly enough in order to assure safety and security of the crew while flying the long-duration flights. What helps us in this situation is the fact that we know each other and we are united, and we have new and better opportunities to unify our effort and start working in a collaborative manner towards new achievements in space. Had we been in a situation that we had to work independently, it would have been a lot worse. And I have to say that Mr. Shepard is the one who we owe him a credit, because we have one of the exercise units on board today, and we have to thank him for suggesting that we need it, because essentially he said that if I won't have a resistive unit exercise on board, I'm not flying anywhere. And when we heard that, we made good friends with Bill, and he was very actively participating not only in the manufacturing but in the design of this unit. And as a result, result, currently we have this amazing capability on orbit, which the entire astronaut, cosmonaut corps is taking advantage of for the benefit of their health and well-being. So this time around, when we have been working on this station, we bumped into a completely new phenomena, which is the recently we have encountered a situation when all of a sudden we nearly stopped our joint activities with our American colleagues in the area of science. And we have achieved a lot in the old days. We have achieved amazing results in the older days, and we have done a lot of joint work, and we have set the stage for a drastic improvement of our situation. We already learned how to make certain steps, how to take advantage of our high level of cooperation. And then all of a sudden, and by the way, we received a common house where we were supposed to be working. And all of a sudden, we had gotten into a situation where we have to share this house based on rules and regulations that are completely obscure to us. We don't understand what are the rules of this engagement. And I would like to welcome those who have any suggestions, actually, because we gotta call it quits. We cannot afford being independent, living in the same house. We've got to enhance our capabilities. We have so much knowledge, so much amazing experience, excellent hardware, and so much work to do. And we have solved great many issues, and now we have to thank those problems. For instance, this problem with vision impairity and intracranial pressure increase is something that helps us a lot, because otherwise we're going to use up all the time for nothing. And I'm looking at Dr. Barrett, who will be the one to be in charge of taking care of the some kind of a boost in our scientific and research common activities. We have got to make sure that we are working based on our capabilities, and this is all logical. It is based on our sincere desire to cooperate, to collaborate, but we should not be jumping through the hoops and overcome hurdles and all kinds of burdens in order to be able to continue. So I'm for further cooperation.
Thank you for your remarks, Dr. Kozlovskaya. Do we have a question for Dr. Kozlovskaya before we move on? Okay, our next panel member is Dr. Julie Robinson. Julie has been the Chief ISS Scientist for NASA for the last 5 years, although she's worked at NASA many more years than that in areas of increasing responsibilities. She's also chair of the ISS Program Science Forum and represents NASA on the Multinational ISS User Operations Panel. So basically, she's kind of one-stop shopping for NASA ISS science. Julie?
Thanks a lot, Leroy. As we look at the space station as a space medicine platform, I'll keep my remarks short, but I want to focus on 2 questions today to keep in the back of your mind. The first question is from a space medicine perspective. When the ISS comes to the end of its life, will we be ready to go beyond? And that's a very challenging question. We have a difficult task ahead of us if we're going to have everything in place that we're ready to move beyond Earth orbit. You heard Shep talk about operations and autonomy challenges, and in fact, we're going to have to use this platform significantly to do simulations for destinations beyond Earth orbit. Also, we will need more knowledge, and you'll hear a whole panel this afternoon about the vision impairment and intracranial pressure issue as an example of knowledge that is still missing and that we're gaining rapidly to make sure that we do know how to help crew members, how the physiological effects of crew members occur. And then, of course, we need to develop and prove countermeasures and technologies to help us overcome those so that we can go safely beyond Earth orbit. And the International Space Station program over the last year or so has made some really significant progress in this area in terms of the ISS Experts Working Group. As you heard Inessa mention, Dr. Mike Barrett, along with Dr. Bogomolov, are leading the Expert Working Group Team 5, which is completely focused on cooperation in the use of human subjects for these important areas. Also, Joel Montalbano will be returning from his detail to Russia, where he's been working with our Russian colleagues intensively for NASA, and he'll be leading Expert Working Group Team 6, focused completely on autonomy and simulation studies. And those of you who know him know he's a former flight director as well, and has a great perspective for helping to move forward on some of the autonomy studies. And so from that, then we see the engineering achievements, the international achievements that come from the assembly of the International Space Station moving on into the utilization phase. And that area is very important, and it's at our hearts. I think many in this room who have spent their careers working in space medicine see that as the primary objectives oftentimes of their careers. But there is a second question that is equally important to that question of will we be ready to go beyond and what do we need to do to get there? And that question is, will we have the political support to go beyond Earth orbit? If you look back in history, when governments have supported exploration, they have always done it for practical reasons, for reasons of economic development. And so if you look at something as simple as Ferdinand and Isabella funding Columbus' voyage to the New World, that was funded, it was high risk. They weren't sure he was going to be successful, but if he was successful, it would open up a new trade route. There was an economic foundation underneath it. And so as we look at the International Space Station and the research that we'll be doing on it in the coming decade, that question is equally important because that platform, the platform itself, will show our leaders if space exploration can return economic benefits, and that will be the foundation of their support for the investments for the next vehicle and the next destination. And so to show that benefit, we need to show how the research and the knowledge gained from the space station benefits our economies. These come in two flavors. One is in the area of spin-offs or technology applications. Right now, everything from the water technology developed for the space station, which is now being used in developing countries and in disaster relief, ultrasound techniques and telemedicine approaches developed for the International Space Station are now being used around the world, in Africa, in far north of the Arctic Circle, to improve prenatal care. Robotic neurosurgery, robotically assisted neurosurgery based on the technologies from the Canadarm developed by Canada have now saved 3 lives in a brand new application to brain surgery. So those kinds of examples come from our technology developments in space. Other benefits in the area of space medicine come back to human health on Earth from the knowledge that we gain from the research we do on ISS. So for example, about a year ago, the drug Prolia came to market, and Amgen had used the space station to help understand the mechanism by which Prolia prevents bone loss as part of their drug development pathway. We have 2 competing teams developing vaccines on the using the International Space Station for a wide variety of bacteria, from salmonella to pneumonia. And we have teams both on the NASA side focused on astronaut health, as well as funded by the National Institutes of Health, using space as a platform for understanding the very complex mechanisms of human immune function. And where better than in space can you provide a new challenge to understand a complex integrated system such as the human immune system. So it is this combination of both advancing our exploration readiness as well as improving life here on Earth that is what makes space medicine such an important component of the International Space Station's portfolio and also an important component of future exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Do we have a question for Dr. Robinson? Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker. Chiaki Mukai is the first female Japanese astronaut. In fact, Chiaki and I flew together on our first space missions way back in STS-65 back in 1994. Chiaki is a medical doctor and also a JAXA astronaut. She, in addition to STS-65, she flew again a few years later on STS-95 with John Glenn and helped do experiments on him, the life science experiments on, I believe it was on the, wanted to take a look at how space might affect someone a little bit older than the average astronaut. And Chiaki, since she left the flying status, has been leading up the JAXA efforts for life science over in the Tsukuba Space Center. Chiaki?
Thank you, brother, for your kind introduction. Lilo is my younger brother when I flew the first time, so we had a very good time. So my brief, I would like to use this opportunity to just give a brief responses to the given topics, which is listed here, like logistics and also the possible reduced crew size and also the cooperative issue. So the number one, the logistic-wise, I have few things to say. The number-wise, of course, access is very difficult, and access is everything. But if access is allowed, the big size of the crew the size of the number of the crew size, the better. From the viewpoint of statistical analysis for the lot of experiments, because we need quite a lot of number to collect in a shorter duration. And also not only the number, but also the diverse crew from the viewpoint of psychological issue and also multicultural issue is required. And here, if I say diverse, it's not only the international diverse, but also the gender diverse as well as the professional diverse too. Because as a professional-driven cultural difference is very big, huge. Like some people from the military is different from the people from the science community or maybe educational community, etc. So the diverse crew is required for have some good science. And also specialization. Again, if the number of the crew at least more than 6 allowed, then the system operator type of crew versus science or a payload type of operator is required to enhance the science. So that this is an issue, I think, of the MCOP, like a multilateral operational crew training or those kind, so that we can specialize the crew to enhance the utilization of the International Space Station. And then, if I can allow to say, the furthermore, again, the access is allowed. Visiting scientist or visiting user type of crew is necessary to get to the public attention, which is very difficult very important and sometimes very difficult to get to the public support, taxpayers' support for the International Space Station, because people think International Space Station or something happening in the space program is very different from our daily life. But what if somebody from your community or from our community can easily access to the International Space Station in a way that they want to utilize it, then suddenly that kind of program, I think the number of the people to fly on the program doesn't matter. The existence of the program itself actually attract the public attention. That's why I think the number-wise, more people and specialized people, and also hopefully the shorter duration flight type of visiting the crew is the one that we have to think for the future to enhance the utilization of the International Space Station. And then the second topic, if we need to possibly reduce the crew size, now the users, the payload community or users have to think, like, then I can come up with maybe 3 things. Like first thing is the tele capability, teleops, teleoperation, telemedicine, teleeducation, tele something. Anything related to tele capability needs to be enhanced. And number 2, onboard diagnostic capability, which is medically, biological samples. Even the easy analysis is okay. But if crew can analyze some, let's say, urine or blood or something like that on board and just send the information to the ground, we don't need to pay a lot of attention to the return sample issue. So the onboard diagnostic capability, including the live imaging analysis method, is the one that the payload community needs to think in case of reduced capability. And also the number 3, that JAXA, our agency, is right now trying to promote more, is the autonomy on the crew. Like, for example, we have a lot of medical devices like Holter ECG to analyze the heart rate variability, and now try to upgrade the onboard analysis capability in a way that crew can analyze the data by themselves, and if they know their body condition on board, and if they wish to report the situation to the flight surgeon on the ground, they can do. At the same time, it will also serve them as just a reference data, saying that, okay, yesterday I had a very good night's sleep, so that I'm ready to work for the difficult work for today, etc. So the onboard autonomy capability is the one that we have to increase, not only the possible reduction of the crew size, but also for targeting to the beyond the ISS, like Moon or Mars or asteroid. So that's the second topics, my response. The third one, related to the cooperative research and sharing of facility, I think everybody fully agree that this statement is very important because we need to work together. That's why we have the international project like ISS exist. So to me, the current status is, compared to the shuttle program that I worked, of course, shuttle, like a Neurolab, had the multilateral collaboration, but most of the time, the shuttle time, it was the combination of the bilateral collaborations. But now we have M-something, MCOP, MMOP, like multilateral operation, medical operational the panel, so that we have more multilateral the sharing of the facility or sharing the research, etc., was performed now. So I think status is good. But of course, nothing is perfect, so that I would like to suggest something for the future. The number 1 is, right now, I think ISRS, I think Mike knows about it, International Space Life Science Working Group is the one that is a kind of strategy entity to set it up, what we have to do for support the future space program, or support the crew health for beyond the ISS, or even on the ISS as a test bed. This ISRS working group is the one that, from our agency's viewpoint, is the highest level of working group to set it up the strategy of the space life science, but it's not included IBMP. So I hopefully that since ISS is 5 IPs joint program with the many other nations included, so that I hope this strategy meeting we would like in future to include IBMP, so that it will be more profitable for everybody. And also, I would like to just say a little bit about the direct return of the crew. I think it's a great idea to have the direct return, but on the time goes by, basically from the viewpoint of home agency, we would like to have own country's crew member as soon as possible to their own country. So maybe on the way back from Russia to Houston, maybe there may have some kind of request coming from space agency saying that, oh, Japanese crew needs to be maybe get off from the airplane on the time that the airplane flies on. So I think this situation may happen because everybody are so excited to bring the home agency's astronaut to come back. So my suggestion is space flight or expedition responsibility is not ended at the landing day. It needs to include the mission, needs to include the post-landing activity, which is very, very important for the space life science people to compare pre-flight and post-flight data. So we really need to have that kind of entire pre-flight, including post-flight duration as a mission duration for the crew, so that the life scientists will not miss the great opportunity to analyze the post-flight data part. I think that is the responses that I have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mukai. Question for Dr. Mukai? Yep.
Катапультирование — это интересная идея.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question.
I can swap.
Yeah, I have a question that actually relates to what you said to Leroy at the beginning, how you referred to him as your brother.
Brother? Yeah.
Yes. And I've spent time on the Defense Science Study Group and the Defense Science Board, and one of the issues has always been women in submarines, which continues to be an issue because the things that have arisen with women on naval ships has not been without problems. So what are some of the ways that NASA has looked at to mitigate problems when there's been men and women together for long periods of time?
I think maybe it's the question to Mike Barrett or somebody, because it's not a situation.
All tough questions.
My approach is since here we have 50% of men and women, why don't we work together? So it's increase the number of the different gender as well as the different diverse people. I think this is great as a program, but I will let Mike Barrett to talk.
I will not sit in the center of this audience.
My sister knows how to pass the buck pretty well.
I'll just say that starting off, we're 20-something years older as an average station population than your average Navy population. People are professional, gracious, just very easy to get along with in general, and I think we train together to do that. We don't really see a lot of gender issues. People have predicted them for a long time, but we just don't see them. And I think a large part of that is we've already gone through a tremendous selection filter. Very, very different from what the general public keeps in their head or what you find in the warfighting arena. So I would start with that and then start looking comparatively again. Now back to the panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Okay, my next panel member is, if Chiaki is my sister, our next speaker is my brother. Salajan Sharipov and I spent 6.5 months together during Expedition 10. Salajan flew his first mission with NASA, flying on STS-89, flew his first shuttle mission on STS-89, and then we started training together, first on different backup crews, then on the same backup crew, and then through all the different changes, ended up together on Expedition 10. Flying up on TMA-5. Salajan was the youngest full colonel. Piece of trivia here: Salajan was the youngest full colonel in the Russian Air Force. He's an Uzbek ethnically, but he was born and raised in Kyrgyzia. And we had a very eventful flight. Spent 6.5 months together on the ISS. And one of the events that we had leading up to the ISS was about 1,000 meters from the station. As we were coming in for our rendezvous and docking, we had a failure of the automatic system. And actually, I'm kind of surprised. The press didn't really pick this up, but we had a pretty significant failure where we started accelerating towards the station rather than slowing down. And we also started to yaw out of plane and started to lose sight of the station. The training kicked in. We got the ship under control, and we were station keeping at 50 meters when the ground told us to go back into automatic, and we weren't really sure why. We had a few words with them and then decided to comply. The failures started happening again. We immediately went back to manual, and Salajan executed the first night manual docking to the ISS, which I believe got him a bit of a bonus. But anyway, Salajan, could we have hear your remarks?
Во-первых, то, что самый молодой полковник российских ВВС, это было
Well, the youngest Air Force colonel, it's been a long time. It's not even true anymore. It was a long, long time ago. Well, it was true back then, yeah.
Ну, конечно, говоря о том, что мы летаем.
Well, when we talk about flying to the International Space Station, we have to say that this is a fascinating endeavor that gives us an opportunity to interact with the international community, share food, share our time with different nations, share our workspace and work time, and during our mission as part of Increment 10. We were up there for almost 6.5 months, Leroy and I, and talking about 2 crew members, 3 or 6 different compositions in different complements. Back in 2005, the station was huge, and it was just the 2 of us. Leroy on the USOS, on the American segment, and I was on the Russian segment, and just the 2 of us, we were able to pull it off and get all the work done. And the entire mission, the way it was planned for us, we did it successfully. And it's not like there were any major complaints about the quality of the work done or our performance. And about the 6-person crew that is flying right now, it comes with a lot of issues. And the previous speaker already mentioned that we need to broaden the spectrum and kind of look at it in a wider perspective, and not just to have cosmonauts and astronauts that are ready for any kind of situation proper, but to refocus on specialization, to have scientists, payload specialists, and this is an issue that needs to be resolved quickly, because outside of station maintenance, we are already spending a lot of time performing science, doing experiments, and these experiments, maybe some of the crew members lack scientific experience, and it would be advisable for future crew members to have gone through special training, or to have specially trained experts be included in crew selection. But overall, station has been manned for a long time. It's been stable and steady. And the issues that all the agencies are faced with get resolved in due time and in due fashion. In NASA training and Roscosmos training and ESA training, and as well as JAXA, that our crew members go through, is consistent with the requirements and the needs as far as task resolution is concerned. And talking about multiple crew members and multiple issues that arise from that, of course, this increases the ground segment involvement, because even though the station is gigantic, this volume is not that large when it's applied to, let's say, 6 or 8 crew members. All of a sudden, it's not that big, because this is a place where you eat, this is the place where you perform your repair activities, this is the place where you work and live. And when there are 3 Russian crew members, you know, one of them is doing physical exercises, then part of the station is not available for any kind of science because you've got an object running for over an hour. So it's a science keep-out zone, so to speak. So for over 3 hours, when you have 3 crew members, the station is unavailable for science because it's dedicated to physical exercise activities. And talking about whether training is consistent and whether it meets its needs, I'm pretty sure, actually very confident that this is a work in progress. There'll be further developments in training flows and training techniques. And as Dr. Kozlovskaya said, we'll be cooperating even more. We have to interact in a broader fashion. And that those little gaps that do come up, we need to bridge them. And as we have been, as we are, as we will be. And we'll fly on. We'll fly further and deeper. Thank you.
Thank you, Saljan. We have a question for Saljan. Okay, thank you, Saljan. Our next speaker is Vadim Gushin. Sorry about the mix-up a little earlier there. Dr. Gushin, we heard from yesterday, had a lot of interesting comments during the Salud Mir and presentations. He's a psychologist at the IBMP, where he has worked for over 28 years. He's currently the head of a psychological laboratory at IBMP and has worked in the area of aerospace psychology for 40 years. Dr. Gushin, welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you, Leroy. Let me continue that metaphor with common house. When you are building your common house, you try to get acquainted with your neighbors. You need them to finish that construction, and you're very close. You have to survive together. Could be some difficulties during the construction period. But then, when your house already is on, you have your own room, and you do not need very much your partners as before. Why? I have my own resources. I am happy. Going outside is a problem, could be some conflicts. It's better to avoid unnecessary contacts and interaction, to be safe and calm. Then there is an outside service providing my new house with power, with water, with some other resources. These people are also very important for me, but they're far away. Always I'm not satisfied with them. You know, in Moscow there is a big problem, that interaction between the people living in the house and those services. Because we need them to repair, but they are not coming. We need their recommendations, they do not give it. So housekeeping without that people is a problem. At the same time, we know that they are not satisfied with us. We're too talkative. We put too much requirements. We want something from them. Why we are not staying calm? So if we stop with that metaphor and look at the ISS, I think we're at that stage when we are very much satisfied with each other, when we have the procedures very well elaborated, and we well know why it's not possible to do many things. Because of some documents, because of the barriers, because of politicians, because of lack of financing. And finally, if we come back to what Shep told us, we feel lack of trust to the partners, to those services which actually is mission controllers. And I think this is quite normal. In the book which we published last year, it's in English, it's on Amazon. If you need references later on, I can give it to you. We made a lot of research, 20 years in different space simulations and pilot study on ISS, which confirmed that the crew flying, it's losing trust to the mission controllers. Moreover, if you look at the papers of MMOP last August, you will see that that partners living in separate rooms, they are not interacting too much, and it's difficult for the crew commander to manage it because they're so self-sufficient, so happy that they are not informing sometimes what is going on in their room. Why? So to sum up, it's all right. We're a strong team. We are much better than the whole world because there are many wars and hunger and diseases downstairs. And there in space, it's more like heaven because people from various nations with that diversity, as our astronauts or cosmonauts are saying, that normal people can do it. Yes, normal people can do it. But it's also normal, that's what I told you about. It's normal to prefer to stay calm solo. It's normal not to interact, being scared of cooperation. It's quite normal to avoid conflicts and to go to the compromise. It's normal to lose trust. So what's my dealing? How to deal with that? I'm seeing that it's not about simulations. We have some evidence, and again, look at the book. We have a lot of data that's about that losing of mutual trust. No, I think it's time to improve the training procedures. And include in that training procedures, not just astronauts, they are almost perfect. To include mission controllers, because it's not only group interaction, this is interaction between the groups, between different teams. And if we do not take this into consideration, as Shep said, when it will be real difficult situation, when it will be real off nominal situation, nobody can guarantee that this common house will be better than all that houses downstairs on Earth. So I'm really a little bit pessimistic from that point, because I do not like love when it's so calm and we are so satisfied with each other and with themselves, with ourselves. This is the problem. And I think that, of course, we can think about political reasons why not to do. We can think about financial crisis. We can think about that we're happy with what we have. But I think it's much better to think today and tomorrow how to improve. And I totally agree with Inessa that this new problem gives us a rise of inspiration. And the more problems we talk about, the more inspiration we will have. And I think, again, our people doing operations, they know why not to do. And they know the problems, degradation, documents. Let's forget a bit about that for a while, and let's think about the problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gushim. Do we have a question for Dr. Gushim? Okay, thank you. Our next panel member is Ron Guerin. Ron is an Air Force pilot and NASA astronaut. He flew operational missions, combat missions in Desert Shield and Desert Storm before joining NASA. After his training, he was assigned to and flew as a mission specialist on STS-124, and then he trained for and flew on Expedition 2728, flying up on Soyuz TMA-1. Ron was affected last year when there was the problem with the Soyuz launcher in August, and his return was delayed by a few months, I believe. So if we could hear your remarks, please, Ron. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Good morning. I just have a couple of brief words, and one of the things I want to say is, you know, we have this word "awesome" that we use today, and it's a very, very, I think, overused word, but I think it's the only word that I can effectively use to describe the International Space Station. I think it's a tremendous technological accomplishment. It's an amazing human accomplishment when you think about the thousands of people all around the globe that work together to make it happen, and it's an incredible political accomplishment. And I think it's a shining example of the power of international collaboration. We spent about a decade constructing this amazing facility in orbit, and we are now open for business. And I think in order for us to maximize our return in investment, the first thing we need to do is define what our product is. And One of our products, I think one of our main products, is scientific advancement. And so how do we presently measure that on the space station is something I think that we really need to address. Right now we look at number of hours that the crew spends on science. We're looking at about 35 to 40 hours a week. But what that number does is it masks the overhead of science. And so if we, through efficiencies and effectiveness, reduce the overhead, say we have 35 hours a week that we're trying to do of science, we are doing of science, and 15 of it is overhead. If we reduce that down by 5 hours, what we effectively have just done is cut our science hours for the week, and if we don't replace it with other science, there's a pretty big disincentive to do that. So I challenge the scientific community to come up with better, to evolve that measure of metrics that we presently use on board the space station to define science. And by science, I don't mean the obvious, which is that science which will enable us to go further beyond low Earth orbit in the exploration of space. I also mean that science that is providing direct benefits to the planet that we all live on. The other part about maximizing our return on investment is maximizing the efficiency on board. And that, from a crew point of view, I think that comes down to the procedures that we use on board every day and how the crew interacts with ground control. I think there's as far as the interaction with the control centers, there's a spectrum, basically. On the one side of the spectrum is complete autonomy, where maybe the ground will link up a procedure and the crew will do it, and or they just launch with the procedures that they're going to use, and there's very little, if any, interaction with the ground. The other end of the spectrum is where every step that the crew does is directed by the ground. And as Shep correctly pointed out, if we're going to go beyond low Earth orbit, we have to have increasing levels of autonomy for the crew to do that. And so I think where we are right now is the assumption from the ground is that we can uplink procedures that are autonomous. So the crew can just take these procedures. They shouldn't have to ask any questions. They should be able to just go and implement those procedures. And there should be very, very little interaction with the ground. And the reason why that assumption is made is we are assuming a more autonomous vehicle than we actually have with the International Space Station. And so until we should have a parallel path of trying to develop the procedures that are effectively autonomous procedures, and what goes into that is accurately reflecting the configuration, the onboard configuration of the vehicle that you're in, to make sure that the starting position, the assumed starting position, is correct, to make sure that we have the proper procedure verifications, and I think those procedure verifications should continue on orbit as well. And the other side of that is until we have a completely autonomous vehicle is we need to develop more interactive ways for the crew and the ground to interact and to work more as a team together to accomplish certain things. And there's many, many examples of how we could do that. So the other thing about maximizing our return on investment is we have to be able to tell this incredible success story that we have that is the International Space Station. We have to be able to tell the success story beyond the space community, who I think for the most part already know that. And since the beginning of the space program, we've always talked about spin-offs and they're very, very important, and it's very true. We have many, many spin-offs that have improved life on Earth, but I think now for the first time can really start honestly saying that we have direct, tangible benefits, and we should be highlighting that as much as we can. As far as telling the story from a PO point of view, from a public affairs point of view, the onboard crew is going to be really crucial in that. So every time the crew does an experiment, they should be able to turn on a camera and say, I'm about to do this experiment. The objectives of this experiment are this and that. The benefits to the Earth are potentially this and that, and the reason why we're doing this experiment in space, in this unique micro-G environment, is because of this or that reason. And so the public understands what the benefit is of them, what you're trying to accomplish on this particular experiment, and why we can't just do this in a lab in Wisconsin, why we have to do it on a $100 billion orbiting research facility. And I think Julia and her team are really making tremendous strides along that way, because the challenge and the trick in this whole thing is to be able to communicate sometimes very technical aspects in a language that the general public will understand, and across many different languages. And so again, I wanted to keep the comments brief, but I'll close with what I opened with, and that's the awe-inspiring, the awesomeness of the International Space Station, and by far, for me, the thing that has struck me the most, having lived there and worked there and helped to construct the facility, is this example of international collaboration, this example of how we can work together towards our common goals. And I am absolutely filled with optimism for our future when I look at all the challenges that our planet faces, all the challenges that our world faces, and I am completely convinced, and I'm convinced of this because of the International Space Station Program, that the answer to all those problems is collaboration. And if we can work together and build this incredible orbiting research facility, imagine what we could do by working together to solve a lot of the problems facing the planet. And that's the message, in addition to the scientific discoveries, that I hope we can communicate to the public and use this as an example for other collaborations around the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Do we have a question for Ron? Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is another accomplished cosmonaut. Oleg Kotov had a career as a military pilot before joining the Cosmonaut Corps. After joining, he actually has flown already 2 long-duration flights, Expedition 15 and, Expedition 15 and Expedition 22/23, and he is currently in training to fly on Expedition 3738, which is scheduled for 2013-2014. So, Oleg?
Спасибо, Лерой. Я так понимаю, где-то мне приходится сейчас.
Thank you very much, Leroy. I sort of wrapping up the activities of our panel. Everybody spoke. I'm the only one who still need to come up with a couple of words, which is a great honor, but rather hard because people are outlined several aspects of what we needed to address during our interchange of opinions, but I still think that I do have something to say. I would like to draw your attention to a scope of problems that require our undivided attention. And then most importantly, the crew training. Preparation for the crew to fly. If we take a look at the evolution of the training patterns, training templates, which we observed over the course of the existence of the International Space Station, it did change substantially from the time point when we were working on the development of the station, and then due to certain reasons we had to step down to the crew of 2 and then increase it to the crew of 6. And we essentially, over the course of this period, applied 2 different approaches. When we were flying the crew of 3, the concept was such that we were training the crew for a long-duration flight based on previous experience, which was previously used for the purposes of Skylab, as well as Salyut and Mir, which is to say that it was a full-blown training provided for the entire crew as a whole, for all 3 crew members in this particular case. In other words, from the jump, it was an integrated crew that was undergoing training for the mission. The first changes started to occur when we had crew members that were supposed to have been delivered to the station by different visiting vehicles, for instance, shuttle. As long as some people were supposed to have been delivered to the station by the shuttle, we were forced to apply certain changes in the system of training. It made it rather much more difficult. The purpose of the training has become more difficult, and the actual training has become a lot more vulnerable and therefore a lot more complex. And the situation became even more cumbersome and complex when we stepped up to the crew of 6. Because the actual training is based on kind of 2 groups of people, 3 of each crew members, and Soyuz can only carry 3 crew members. So we assign people to a particular Soyuz. Those 3 folks go through a full circle of training over the course of 2.5 years, and then during the actual flight, they will be working with another group of people, and then another 3 months with yet even 3 more people. So now we're talking essentially about a combination of 9 individuals working essentially a portion of their flight assignment together on board of the International Space Station. A standalone issue has to do with the commander of the crew, because the commander is inevitably a part of one of those three. He is in charge of taking care of distributing the responsibilities, which is not easy to keep an eye on. And eventually, basically, the role of the commander was reduced to the activities under off-nominal situation, most important periods of time. The rest was taken away from the commander. And this is a lengthy process, but now we're very close to stating that all of a sudden the commander is not much of a commander anymore. So the whole situation boiled down to the fact that we needed to assign the responsible crew members for any given segment. USOS, Russian segment, Japanese, European, because we have multinational crews. Multinational activities are associated with certain amount of disintegration, and inevitably, once again, the Russian crew members spend the bulk of their time on the Russian segment. American crew members spend most of their time on USOS, and so on and so forth. Also, the crew is being divided for groups of three, which I already mentioned before, depending on the way they are delivered. And each group of three consists of both U.S. crew members and Russian crew members, to say nothing of Japanese and European crew members. This imposes a great deal of difficulty on the whole way of making sure that the crew is ready to fly. All psychological aspects, for instance, in this particular setting, are being ignored. We just rely on the fact that we did not make a mistake while selecting those crew members. That's all. We are hoping that the crew members, having gone through rigorous training, having been selected based on very rigorous principles, will be able to act accordingly as part of those teams. The loads are getting higher and higher. The amount of science is higher, bigger, broader, and eventually it leaves very little room for anything else. Psychology is something that needs to play and does play its role, but it's an intangible factor of the crew activities, and it's always difficult to deal with the issues like that. So, sooner or later, it has become obvious that we need to make sure that our crew members specialize in particular areas, and along those lines of speciality that will be devoted, that the crew members will devote most of their attention. Different groups of people started emerging on board. Some social groups, for instance, people who have been delivered on one and the same vehicle, stay closer to each other on board. And second division is being based on a professional lines, like according with the different segment. People are a lot more common when it comes to representation of any given and particular segment. It's a complex issue. And at the same time, it's an interesting issue. And why is it interesting? Because we definitely need to be able to address this in order to elevate the efficiency, in order to assure that we will be doing reasonable amounts of cross-training to make sure that we should stay away from dividing the crew based on other professional preferences and national preferences or even food preferences. We need to make sure that people are providing their fair share of effort when it comes to implementation of common science programs. Commonality, continuity, consistency are the basic principles that we need to abide by. And I'd like to address one more aspect. When we talk about increasing the duration of our flights, it is inexorably linked with the training. To fly longer, we need to train crew members on board. Because there are some activities, some procedures, some events that need to be supported by the crew having fresh skills. And even an EVA is a beautiful example of that. When the crew is about to leave the pressurized volume, particularly during 6 months flying, it's not possible to stay fit, stay on the basic level of readiness that the crew used to have prior to flying after those skills were fresh. So it is imperative that we work out capability of providing basic training, refresher training for the crew prior on the eve on actual operations. The same is true for the experiments. That in some instances the crew will be expected to conduct certain experiments on board which they didn't get exposed to on the ground at all. So the ground will be responsible of furnishing certain amount of handouts, information, briefings for the crew members so they would do this science in a most conscious manner. This is an important, one of the most important aspects of doing the long-duration flights, and obviously the concept of medical support also needs to be changed, because currently the medical support is being provided during the flight only in the instances when something very serious happens. Obviously it is clear, because we always know that if anything is to happen, anything more important, we always, as a final resort, could take the crew down to the ground and provide this crew member appropriate medical support. But when we're going to be flying to deep space, when we're going to be flying longer, it's quite clear that we will be devoid of this capability. We will not be able to interrupt the flight and take the crew member who had gotten seriously ill back to the ground, because it's simply not feasible. So we need to make sure that the crew has the supply of health, uninterrupted supply of health, and the amount of health available to the crew member in such a way that he wouldn't have to resort to any artificial ways of supporting this amount of health and be able to survive throughout the entire long-duration flight back and forth. And to wrap up my statement, I would like to extend my personal thanks to all of you for your kind attention, for your participation, particularly my fellow panelists who have got all the ISS-related problems at their fingertips. And we could talk for much longer, I'm sure, because we got a lot to say, but we're limited, and we're very adamant about some things about the ISS too. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and goodbye.
We have a question for Oleg?
Yeah, thank you for your comments. There seems to be a theme today, at least in part, among several panelists, that what we need to look at now is a new way of training, and to training for some of the new realities. And thinking about yesterday and the comment made by a panelist that we sometimes should look at lessons learned from the past that we forget, it occurs to me that some of the things you mentioned just now in terms of training with a staggered crew, with different nationalities represented going up at different times, that the Russians have had that experience during their guest program and the Salyut, and also in the Mir and the Shuttle Mir program. And I'm wondering if there's some lessons from those older programs in training that might address some of the concerns that you just raised.
Хочу сказать, что как раз именно такого опыта и не было, что международная станция.
I'd like, first of all, to say that we are lacking this experience. And this is essentially for the first time that we bumped into a situation by which we were delivering diverse kind of crews, and the methods of delivery was different. Previously, we've been doing it pretty consistently. The crew has been selected on one and the same day, and they used to go through the entire training as one team. There was very few, if any, deviation from this pattern. And obviously, this approach, while it has some flip side, obviously, drawbacks, it also had a lot of advantages. So, like I said, the experience like that, we didn't have it in the past. Now we're desperately trying to utilize every grain of experience that we have access to. And along these lines, I would say a couple of more words about the process of assigning the crew. And I'd like to think that we are living through the time that, you know, some people are saying that it's time to assign pure scientists to the crews. And the thing is that the composition of the crew is governed by the flight program. If we, by scrutinizing the flight program, we will get convinced that we will be able to capitalize on the fact that the crew member, the scientist, is a part of the crew. This is another story. But what I'm saying, what we shouldn't be doing this judgment blindly, regardless of the flight, because this ongoing wrangling regarding the preferences and advantages associated with using just merely an operator as opposed to a scientist, they were going on forever and will be going on for a long time. We need people who know how to do basic mechanical work and conduct experiments, and ideally people who can do both. We cannot afford the division between those who can do work, who can do repairs, maintenance, and who can conduct experiments. Because no matter what kind of advantage we're going to be getting, we will have...
I think you had something to add?
Yeah, I want to do a trusted American thing. I want to pile on to what you said. My happiest day flying in space was when we were on Expedition 1 and flew over Houston, got up in the morning. We had read the plan for the day. You get a cup of coffee, you're reading the printouts, and it said, 1400, we want you to change this procedure and do something else. And we're reading this. We didn't have continuous communications. 20 minutes later, we're over Europe. We're linked into Moscow, and Moscow said, no, 1400, we want you to do something else. And this went on a couple times. And I got on the horn one day to Houston and then repeated the same discussion to Moscow, and I said, "Eta blaha muha," which means in American and English, that's BS, because you guys on the ground you're talking to the International Space Station. We are one crew proceeding on one expedition to do one mission. And we are not running the space station to salute Houston or Moscow. You know, we're working for a common team on the ground. And you guys get your act together and call us when you have a unified program, and we'll execute that. And that was my happiest day on orbit. But I have a feeling that we're going backwards here because we are not doing this now. And this was another one of the things that I talked about early on, that agreements and procedures that had been planned long before our flight that were not honored. It was agreed from the start that the commander had certain responsibilities and authorities for the well-being of the crew and the safety of the vehicle, and particularly in extremis, when it was not clear what the ground wanted the crew to do or we couldn't talk to the ground, that person was responsible to keep things safe, and we do not embrace that now as fully as we need to. And this is the key to having expeditionary voyages in space, and we better figure out how to select the right people and how to give them the training to do this.
Thank you, Shep. Let's see, we have two more panelists to get through, and certainly you don't want to diminish their remarks. Our next speaker is Dr. Evgenia Yarmanova, and she was with us yesterday making comments, very constructive comments on the Salyut and MIR programs. And so welcome back to the panel, or back to the front here. Dr. Yamanova has worked for many years at IBMP, and she is the chief designer in charge of all the Russian biomedical hardware that helps to keep us healthy in space. Dr. Yamanova.
Хочу коснуться двух вопросов. Первый вопрос. Значит, да, перед этими двумя вопросами.
There's two things I wanted to discuss. First, I want to say about how many people it takes to work on the station. It should be an optimal number. How do we define that number? It's the station volume and the equals capability that should drive that decision.
Если, да, то, безусловно, потребуется дополнительное оборудование. Ну, например, у нас дорожка бегущая, она вообще-то может обеспечить тренировки только 2 человек. Не только по своей надежности, даже не сколько по своей надежности, сколько по времени экипажа, которые тренируются на ней в течение дня.
Поэтому, если that it takes to train all the crews on it. So if we increase to 9 people on station, then we'll need a 3rd treadmill. We need to have room to house that treadmill and so on and so forth. Now, regarding the hardware integration, what I wanted to mention here, of course, we wanted to make station truly integrated, and for that we need those connective tissues that would be bringing us together, at least with respect to technical aspect of things, i.e. hardware. And since station has already crossed its midlife crisis, so to speak, it's already been on there for half a life that it's designed for, and it's clocked in quite a few hours, as you know. And saying that that's the fact, we have to realize that hardware integration is becoming ever more critical. For example, if a piece of critical hardware fails, then replacing it with the neighbor's piece of hardware should be important and should be an availability. To give you a quick example, we all realize that if a veloergometer trainer fails on one segment, the other segment should be able to use the should make its complement available. And at this point, we have 3 ECG holders on there, and if one partner's device fails, it's not a proven fact. It's actually a fact that they will not be able to grab an identical piece of hardware from their partner. Plus medical tests that define crew performance, that allow us to determine EVA readiness. With respect to that, of course, every site has their own equipment and has their own test techniques. And we wanted to make sure that we do everything in our power, and then some, to make sure that when tests are getting developed, integration is something that gets taken into account. Because, for all we know, it could end up being a deciding factor. When it comes time to perform a test, it could be at that time that a piece of hardware fails and we'll need to go elsewhere. So that's something else that I wanted to emphasize. Besides that, I wanted to say a few things about space experiments. It's a regrettable fact, but a fact nevertheless. There's only one experiment, LADA, wormhouse plant growing experiment that's currently going on. It'll be an important one for interplanetary flights of the future. And that's very little, if anything. That's for joint experiments. We should have a lot more joint experiments underway, because that will pave the way to communicate on certain types of levels that will allow us to tap into each other's technology and share those technologies, while at the same thinking about how to apply those technologies on Earth. So we really would love to have those joint space experiments to be an increasing number from here on out. In addition to that, we would love for the partners to be approaching the hardware that their partners have in the following sense: as just a piece of equipment that's there to be potentially applied in their own experiment. Let's take the Chibis. I heard about it, I know about it, I guess the US side is interested. I figure they're interested, but then of course we need to discuss the interface types of issues. And so on. And in summation, I would like to say that we would love for our joint cooperation to be so joined that we actually lose track of it being joined and it becomes one integrated body of...
Dr. Yarmanova. Any questions for Dr. Yarmanova? Okay, our last panelist is certainly not our least, and Vladimir Titov, I've saved him for last for a reason. Volodya is a very, very experienced cosmonaut. His flying career spanned Salyut, Mir, and ISS, and so I thought he'd be the perfect cleanup batter to kind of take us through his experiences and how the programs have evolved and built upon each other. Volodya flew as commander of Soyuz T-8. And I would say that he's had 4.5 space flights, because on Soyuz T-10 they had a pad aboard, and Volodya is one of only Volodya and Gennady Strekalov are only one of two people who've survived and experienced a pad abort when their launcher caught fire and they were taken away by the launch escape system and put down in a field about 1 kilometer away. And I think, Volodya, your first thought after that was all that training. Volodya went on to fly on Soyuz TM-4 to Space Station Mir, and he also flew on Space Shuttle on STS-63 and then on STS-86, and I believe was the first person to actually do EVA, have EVA experience in both Orlan spacesuits and U.S. EMUs. So Volodya is a very accomplished cosmonaut, obviously, and so we'd like to clean up with his remarks.
Спасибо, Лерой. Уважаемые участники саммита, я бы хотел вам сказать сначала, что на станции международной я не был.
Dear summit guests, here's what I would like to say. I have not been to the International Space Station, but I did have something to do with the organizational aspects and working for a number of years in for the Boeing Corporation. You know, I did have a certain relationship with the station, but this is not what I wanted to talk about right now. You've been talking about a whole number of tactical issues with respect to station maintenance, medical support, station repairs, and so on and so forth. But I wanted to kind of open the window on the side, so to speak, and talk about strategy. There's one strategic line that's in existence right now that we need to think of as real important, that it is. And I'm thinking in the future it will be a major impact as far as using the International Space Station for future programs. In late 90s, early 2000s, in other words, at the turn of the century, there came up a new term, space commercialization, or private space, commercial space. At first, specialists were laughing this thing off. They would point their fingers and be like, how do you build a space rocket in a garage? But it just so happens that a garage has turned into a cutting-edge industry. Take SpaceX, for example. Look at the facilities that they've got right now. Beautiful. What I'm a little worried about, a little apprehensive about, actually, is this following. At this point in time, commercial companies that feel like space is business have come up like mushrooms after rain. And you can think of them as belonging to two different groups. One group of companies uses the experience that federal entities have laid for them using federal standards. And they take those, they apply their own standards, and they build an old new piece of hardware. For example, a small company, Excalibur Almaz, that use an old piece of hardware, a recoverable original capsule of the Alma station that used to be a federal standard type of project. It's very detailed, it's very thorough, and this capsule flew for 9 times, and everything was an astounding success. And the Boeing company that is of great repute in the space business is one thing, but then you've got those who have started from ground zero, from scratch. And so you have to ask questions. At this point in time, let's say NASA had a competitive bidding, and there were 42 companies that were in the running, and only 4 of them have won contracts, direct NASA contracts. These are commercial entities. Everything else falls into either those who didn't win or they're on standby, on waiting list. Some companies have already been receiving their contracts. Yesterday, or as early as today, there was a launch that was scheduled that got rescheduled again, and I'm not so worried about the launch because, but also, you know, a rocket needs to be reliable. But you've got a commercial vehicle flying towards the station, i.e. people. Let's say it's only a cargo vehicle at this point in time. I'm concerned, and my concerns are the people that are carrying the burden responsibility. Of course, I'm not there anymore, but those who are responsible for operational decisions, have they checked out the standards compliance? For example, air quality on this vehicle, mechanical admixtures, dust, other particles that may end up in, you know, in the crew members' eyes or in their airways. Then the interior materials. Is there off-gassing? Is there no off-gassing? If it is off-gassing, is this toxic? Is this hazardous? How hazardous is it, if it is? How much of a danger does it present to the crew health? And if it's a manned vehicle, then you've got a snowball effect as far as the issues that need to be faced and resolved. And if you've got a company of Boeing stature or some Russian space corporations, these standards are you know, something that they've been drilled into them for decades. They know this material is combustible, it won't lead to any lethal effects, for example. And now you've got the commercial players. They're rushing. Who's going to be there first? Being there first translates into getting good contracts, and that's, you know, a freebie. You know, you've got a federal contract, you know, off to the beach you go. You know, it's bread and butter. And so I'm concerned, and I'm concerned about the fact that good, quote-unquote, good materials may be used, but not the space type of materials, those that will have been proven to be acceptable in space. And I would like to urge those that are in this field to pay a lot of attention, to be extra cautious about these aspects. You know, if you're a player, do play your part in that decision-making process. How it's to be used, whether it's to be used at all. Is it go or is it not? If it is there any modification that needs to be implemented? If there's a need? That's just one of the issues. As far as crew size, deltas, you know, it's a major issue. We already had this kind of a shift back in '88 on the Mir station. Valery Pavlikov flew with us for 4 months, and then he stayed on there with a different crew for another 6 months. So this experience is there. Well, thank you very much for your time. Good luck.
Thank you, Volodya. Do we have a question for Volodya or any other members of the panel? We're running a little bit over, but we probably got time for 1 or 2. Shot.
Thank you. The question is short. The answer is up to you. The question was actually meant to be for you, Leroy, and Salijan. Salijan has stepped out, so it will be shorter then. What's your perspective as a crew member who has participated in a joint scientific program, and your perspective not on the program itself, but on the integration versus segmentation aspect of it, and your intellectual contribution, and what was claimed for you from you intellectually as a crew, and how did it make your life different, if at all?
Yeah, and of course, you know, doing the scientific investigations gives a lot of meaning to being in orbit, especially during a long flight. We all like to feel like we're accomplishing and moving things forward. I think you're specifically just talking about the ultrasound experiment, Adam, and frankly, that was my favorite experiment during my expedition, and I think Salajan's too. And you know, it was kind of a joint program, and I think it worked very well. We worked with your team on the ground. We did the training mostly in Houston, and there was only a few hours of training. But the results, you know, I know that you guys have had follow-on results that have worked very closely with Russian investigators concerning bracelets, and also very successful. And I think it is always a good thing to work together, you know, and I think that was one of the enjoyable aspects for me personally on that mission, was that it was an experiment that Salajan and I were performing together, you know, under kind of joint supervision. The, you know, natural tendency, especially with a two-person crew, was to go kind of into segmented ops. You know, most days Salajan would work in the Russian segment, working with the Russian Mission Control Center, and I would spend most of my days in the U.S. lab working with the Houston Mission Control Center. But when we did have occasion to work together on either an experiment like that or on a repair task, you know, that was especially you know, more pleasant, I think, because we were actually doing a lot of work together. So I think the goal of having joint operations is a good one, but we need to recognize that naturally sometimes it's going to break out into segmented operations as well. So we need to have the flexibility to accommodate both. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. Thanks. One last one?
For Valerie, I'd just like to say amen. And I think I'd add the same thing for all of the crew members that are up there. What they've been saying is something that needs to be heard more and more by those that are not necessarily experienced at spaceflight.
Okay, thank you, Walt. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Please give one more round of applause for our panel members. And stay tuned for a very interesting topic coming up. Thanks, Shep.
Yeah.
Good comments, man. I agree with you.